Okay, guys. So today, I guess this is a week. Oh man, I don't know what week this is. Anyways, this is going to be a review for for and while loops. For and while. Um, so hopefully by now you've gotten at least the basics of for and while loops. I'm just going to cover them again just to be sure that everyone is on the same page. Because it can be tricky. I've also put up a video with a good example problem, a good tracing problem that you might see like sort of on a quiz or on an exam. And hopefully uh, that this gets you going. So I'm actually going to start with for loops because I think it makes more sense if we do it this way. And it's the most recent thing you've learned, right? So for for loops, a couple things are true, and maybe you know what we'll do? We'll split this up and do a little side-by-side comparison. Um, so for for loops, you know up front what's changing. So what is changing? So what I mean by this is, and I'll write this in a different color. If I write a for loop, it looks something like this, like for a equal 1 to 15, right? I know that a is going to be 1, then it's going to be 2, then it's going to be 3, so on and so forth. Regardless of what's later in my for loop. So I can have whatever in here, and then my end statement, but I always know what a is going to be. Now, this is not true for while loops. So you don't always know what's changing. Always know what's changing. So changing. Oh, goodness gracious. Okay, I only selected the end. Let's just do that. Changing. So what I mean by this is we have our for loops, right? So if I write an equivalent while loop, right? And so say I have a defined somewhere above. If I have while a is less than 12, right? Well, somewhere, right? One of our conditions for our while loops is we know somewhere in here a changes, right? And so because of that, we don't really know what it's going to be each iteration, at least not upfront. What else is different? So because of this, this is sort of in the same vein. You know how many times it runs. How many times it runs? And in while loops, you don't. So if I have this same for loop, so I say a is equal to 1 to 15. This is what I have from my for loop up here, right? If I have this, what I can do, whatever this condition is, right, is if I have a really complex statement. So like if I had, so this obviously is going to be it 15 times, right? Well, what if we have something more complicated than this? So what if I have a by 2 to 15. Well, then this is going to be 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, 15. So what is that? That's 15 divided by 2, and then we have both, so that's 8 times. And so let's count 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, 15. Right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, this is 8 times. Well, what if we get something even weirder, right? What if we did 1 to 15, but we did it in steps of 2.7, right? Okay, now it's like funky, right? We get 1, then we get 3.7, then we get what? 6.4. So this isn't easy. So what you can do is, now maybe this wouldn't be a question on an exam because we don't want to just have you guys doing algebra where you can make an algebra mistake. But this is something that if you run into it on an MA and you're like, well, how many times does this loop run? I don't even know. What you can do is you can simply take the length of this, right? And so you, or rather you would take the length of A. So I'll erase this here. But you take the length of A and you get your result. And so I don't know. You can plug that into MATLAB to find out. For this, for the same reasons here, since A changes inside, you don't really know how many times it will run, at least from a glance. So what are they used for? This is a really big thing. So this is used for data validation. This is while loops are used for data validation. And that's a huge thing for while loops. That's what we've had you do on several MAs. So we use it mainly for data validation. And what's the other thing? The other thing that we use it for is control. So control is super, super important. So what I mean by control is ask the user if they want to repeat the selection process again or something like that. When we have you do that at the end of the code, that's what we mean by control. So these are the two most common ways to do it that we use it in this class. I have a good example problem that maybe I'll go over that uses a while loop that isn't one of these two things. And so anything where there's a condition. So there's a condition, and so a question is asked. Now it might be, is this number bigger than this number question, but it might also be a like actual prompt to the user. So a question is asked, right? Because it asks, it's acting similar to an if statement. Now on the for loop side, we use this when we know, and I'm putting this in big letters for a reason, when we know how many times to run, or that we know the range. So here, right, we say we know how many times it runs. Well, that is actually almost because we tell it how many times it has to run. So if we do something simple like this, well, that's sort of just apparent as to how many times it runs. But if we're doing something like this, then it's more complex, right? So we sort of, but the big point is that we know something about the range of the problem, the scope that we're working on, before the code is even run. Yeah. So let me think here if there are any other big differences. I really don't think so. And this has actually almost been a pretty good coverage of for loops and while loops. So I think what I'll do now, since I don't want to just waste your time and continue talking about something that I think I'm done with, is tips for while loops, while and for loops. So first tip, number one, super, super important. This isn't just important for for and while loops. This is important for if statements as well. So make sure that when you're working on code, when you're coding, your indentation is correct. So what I mean by this, and I can switch over to MATLAB briefly, is here my for loop is indented, my while loop is indented, and my stuff inside my while loop and in stuff my for loop is indented to be at the same level, right? This is super important when you have a larger block of code that takes that has a bunch of different things in it. So one of the most common problems I've seen so far on the MA that you're working on MA5, MA6, whichever one you're working on right now, was students would have their while loop and they would think that it's surrounding what they want it to surround, but it's not, because they've added it afterwards and they're completely lost. So what you can do, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually get rid of this. So now this is incorrectly spaced, and let's go ahead and just like make this one incorrectly spaced too. Of course, now I screwed that up too. So both of these are incorrectly spaced. Now it looks like a whole freaking mess. What I can do, so actually I won't even do that. I'll show you. Control A to select everything. Control I indents it. So on a Mac, that's going to be Command A, Command I. But there's also a button. So if I hover over this, maybe it'll tell me what it is. But anyway, it's this first button is Smart Indent. So obviously I'm indented correctly now. So if I select everything again and I Smart Indent, it fixes. So if you don't remember the hotkeys. Anyways, regardless, make sure that it's properly indented, because it helps you keep track. That's the whole reason we asked you to do it, is because it helps you keep track. The first thing I do when I'm grading these MAs is do Command A, Command I, just so that I can keep track and make sure that I know what you're trying to do, and find any errors quickly. So make sure that you're doing that. On the written portion, write out the iterations. So something that I saw on a quiz that we gave yesterday in class was some students finished way before other students, and their scores were way worse. So the reason for this is because they're not spending the time to write out the different iterations of the code. So if you go to the other video that I'm going to upload, which is the problem that I just showed, so hopefully you didn't memorize what I had on the screen there. But if you go to that video and do that problem, that's something where you have to write out the iterations. If you like, I was very skeptical. I was skeptical of my own answer when I wrote the code, because I thought, man, is that really right? And the answer is yes. It was written correctly and everything, but it was something that was not readily apparent. It wasn't something that you could just do in your head. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time. I'm not bad at any of these problems by any means, and I still can do that in my head, sort of just cold. So write out the iterations, especially when you're taking a quiz and things like that. It'll pay dividends, I promise. So your indentation is correct. I should probably finish my sentences. So we want you to write out your iterations. What are some other helpful for and while loop tips? So, this is a huge one actually. I'm glad I didn't forget this. Indexing is important. Indexing is important. Oh my gosh. I'm gonna actually, so this actually reminds me, I think I might just do another video on this because of how important it is in loops. It's so crucial. This is why we stress it so much, and I think some of you guys just don't believe us maybe when we say that you're gonna need it later, and to really work at it, because it's apparent that some people just don't and they never understand it. But indexing is very critical to the course. So indexing was important when we were just doing sort of like matrix multiplication and things like that, and array multiplication. It's even more important now in loops when we're selecting specific points out of indices. So indexing is still important. And yeah, just if you haven't mastered indexing, if you don't know why certain things work, or if you're given a question where indexing is part of it and you get it wrong, go back, make sure that you actually understand. And this is something that's an invaluable skill in life. This is a life skill, life lessons with John. But you have to know what you do and do not understand, because I think that that's probably one of the biggest problems in this class and in future engineering classes is students have you, and professors emphasize this all the time. They read like a solution manual, they see how problems are done, and they think, okay, I can do those problems now. But when you just read that, normally most people don't get actually understand it. So maybe you like pass by and your memorization comes out and you get C's or B's, but you don't actually understand it. You don't actually have a sense of what's going on in the problem. So make sure that you truly do understand. That note aside, there was one more thing that I was gonna say. So indexing is important in loops. It had something to do with that, I think. Well, I guess I can't think of it anymore. It wasn't nearly as important as indexing, though. The indexing is really what's going to get you. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else to cover. Yeah, I don't think so. I think that's most of it. So yeah, as always, let me know if you have questions in the comments. I check the channel sort of regularly. Make sure that you're coming to office hours, and I don't know. Make sure that you're keeping up to date with everything, because well, I know for a fact some of you aren't. So make sure that you're keeping up with everything, and you'll be doing just fine. Um, if you're watching this before next Monday and Tuesday, you'll get your exam grades back, or you'll actually get your exams back. So you'll get feedback on that. Make sure that when you get your exams back, make notes of what you did incorrectly. I don't know why we don't get questions about the exams. It's as if you guys think that we're not going to sort of like reach it. It's like you think the class isn't cumulative when we tell you it's cumulative all the time. So really do take it to heart. We're here to help you. We're not tricking you. Make sure that you get you use the feedback that you get from the exam to make yourself a better learner. Anyways, so I guess I'll write here. Thank you, and hopefully you guys got something out of that.